Please feel free to connect with us at CharityVillage after the webinar. We're always happy to chat. A few housekeeping items before we get started. In order to have the best audio experience for everyone, we do have you all on mute. That means that while you'll be able to hear us speaking, we won't be able to hear you. If you do have a question or comment during the session, please type it into the question box on the bottom of your control panel. We'll do our best to address it in the question and answer period. We'll be running a few polls during the session as well, where you'll have an opportunity to vote on your screen, so please do join in. Of course, we're all in different locations across Canada, and using technology has its advantages, such as bringing us all together today, but it can also be a little finicky. If you're experiencing a technical issue during the webinar that affects how you're seeing or hearing the presentation, do drop us a note via the questions box on your webinar control panel. We may also communicate with attendees in this area if we're noticing anything on our end that might be affecting your experience, so keep an eye there. We will be recording the webinar today, and we'll provide this recording to each of you after the event, so there's no need to worry if you get called away during the session. There will be a few downloadable tools also made available after the event on our website, and we'll be letting you know how to find these in the next couple of days. And with that, I'd like to introduce our presenter for today, Veronica Utton of V. Utton & Associates. Thanks for joining us today, Veronica.
Good afternoon. I hope everyone is ready to learn something new. We're taking a look at before the job posting, all of the critical aspects that need to take place before you can successfully launch your job posting. So on the line we have Tracy Johnson. She's fairly active in the design of this particular webinar that we'll be going over, and myself, I'll let you read those things at a later point when you receive your copy of the presentation. So to jump right in terms of what we hope you to take away today is you will be aware of the job design process. There's definitely some steps to follow to ensure that you are designing the right job to get that right candidate, and then how that job design fits right into the development of your job posting. We'll take a look at some legal factors that you'll need to consider as you are creating the job and therefore creating the job posting, and then you'll be oriented to some steps to use to identify the ideal candidate. So again, this is all in advance of getting your job posting out the door. So to kickstart things, as Marina mentioned, we want to get you involved and hear from you as it relates to your perspective. And to start, we want to get a better sense of your new job creation experience. And when I say new job, it refers to a job that you have never had in the organization. So from scratch, you recognize the need to do things a little differently, or that you needed different skills within the organization, and then you then had to create the documentation to support what skills and what accountabilities that new job would have. So Marina, we will bring that poll up.
Excellent. And Veronica, I'll just get you to share your screen too, if you don't mind. So everybody, this is your chance to have your vote. So just click on your screen to indicate whichever option you'd like to vote for. So Veronica, it looks like we're having over 40% are suggesting that they've never created a job. About 30% that they're using the previous employee's annual performance form.
Okay then. So that gives us a fairly good sense of all of you that are in the room. And so we will just go on to take a look at some of the job design steps. But before we do that, we'd like to encourage you to spread whatever news you're learning today by tweeting out to the hashtag CV hiring webinar. And that way we can create some learning all around for those, and at a later point in time you can actually review all of those tweets to see what other people were learning along the way. So taking a look at the job design steps, and we will be sequentially covering off all of these aspects.
Veronica, excuse me, I'm just going to jump in and, oh, there we go. I think we can see your screen now, so that's great.
Are you there now?
Perfect.
There we go. Okay. So in taking a look at all of these steps sequentially, first you've got to start out by organizing the work. So what exactly is it that the organization needs to be able to achieve and through this particular job? We'll take a look at how you go about creating a workforce plan, because you have to have a sense of how this particular job fits into your longer term design of the organization and of the work, generally speaking. We'll take a look at those legal considerations. So what is in the legal environment that you absolutely need to be aware of and be cognizant of as you are creating the job? And then steps in actually defining what that job looks like. So in terms of organizing the job, we take a look at something around form, because you have to have a sense of what it is you're there to do before you can create the functional aspects of what you're going to be doing. So it's anchored in the organization's vision, mission, and values. So what is it that the organization desires to be? How does the organization believe it's going to meet that end goal? And in terms of values, what are some of the guidelines, the principles that the organization believes in that directs how you interact or how you actually achieve the vision and the mission? So taking a look at what that framework of work could look like. I've given you an example here of how a framework of responsibilities could begin to look. And just taking some of the common senior positions in the typical fundraising organization, you've got your executive director role, and then you have a fundraising role. Now, the overall accountability statement is based specifically on the goals and the strategy of where the organization wants to go. So in this particular situation, the executive director is there to provide overall and effective leadership and management to staff and volunteers in achieving organizational goals, whether those goals are to raise $30 million or to engage volunteers in aspects of the work that it does, or to create a forum where exchange can happen as it relates to research or awareness building. And so some of the program development and or fundraising responsibilities, and again, these are at a high level, so that you can delineate between what the executive director's responsibilities are and the fundraising specialist's job might be. And so again, understanding what those high-level goals and strategies are in the organization helps you to create this high-level framework that you can take right across the organization to help, again, distinguish between what it is you need one job to do over the next job. And so in creating that workforce plan, it helps you to determine what skills you're going to need, so the right skills at the right time and in the right place for the organization. And you're working through the process of creating that plan, of then attracting the right staff, and then developing those staff once you have them in the door. Now, creating that workforce start specifically to ensure that you have the right number of people with the right skills at the right time and in the right jobs. And in creating that workforce, you're taking a look at market trends, you're taking a look at demographical trends, perhaps at political issues that might influence the work that you do as an organization, of technical advances that might impact the way the work is being done. Economic conditions may determine how much you're able to raise or to what extent you're able to reach out to your stakeholders. And so all of these elements have to be taken into account when you're creating your workforce plan. So more specifically, when you're forecasting your organization's labor demand, you have to understand some of the history of where the organization has been as it might relate to where you are going in the future. And you could use one mechanism, quantitative method, trend analysis, to understand what the organization's behavior has been in the past so that you can give a reasonable estimation as to how things might happen in the future. So if you were able to raise $30 million using 60 staff, and you know that the organization needs to grow over time to be able to raise 40 million staff, you will see over time, through, let's say, 2010, 2011, 2012, how your revenues have fluctuated based on the level of staff that you had in any one year. And then as it relates to ratio analysis, you could use a similar approach where you can see exactly how, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but looking at the forecast of the future staff based on the ratios between one factor, and that one factor could be fundraising dollars, and over another factor, which could mean the employees, the number of employees needed. So in this example, you can see that there is a difference between the level of income or fundraised dollars that a senior development officer could raise over that of a more junior development officer. And so it, again, gives you a sense of, if you're looking to increase your revenue levels, what level of staff will you need based on the historical data that you have telling you how much a senior development officer has been able to raise in your organization. Now, you could also, if you didn't have this historical information, you could access this information through similar organizations. So there would be general enough information available that you could forecast based on like-minded organizations. Now, taking a look at supply. So once you've determined what your demand is and what you're going to need over perhaps the next operational year, you then have to consider, well, where am I going to get these people from? So that labor supply can be internally, so there could be people internally that could be ready for that next move. Or if there aren't the skill sets inside the organization, then of course you're looking outside of the organization. So internally, what helps to determine whether you have the right skill sets in place is to have a skills inventory mechanism in place. Now, in some small organizations, certainly this can be managed by way of a simple Excel spreadsheet. But if you are fortunate to be able to afford and have access to a human resource management system, you're able to track and report on information like the level of education the individual might have, the languages they might speak, the training they may have received, their ability to be relocated or interest to be relocated if that's important. So all of these kinds of details can be nicely tracked in some sort of skills inventory mechanism to help you identify who those individuals might be that you could potentially either promote or move laterally in the organization. Now, taking a look as well sort of down the road, you want to be able to create systems, more sophisticated systems, that again can help you manage growth as it happens in the organization. So something like replacement charts, and you're seeing this in the visuals here, is where you can actually identify individuals within the organization and the skills they have, the years of experience they have with the organization, as well as their performance rating. Because you may, within your organization, set a standard that we will only take a look at individuals for promotion or movement if they have achieved a certain level of performance. Now, succession planning takes it one step further in that you are actually creating a path for key roles in your organization. So in a, I'm going to say, medium-sized organization where there is an executive director, there could be a vice president of finance and administration, there might be a vice president of or a director of planning or research or program development, then you may need to identify which are the key roles in the organization, so such that we need these roles in order for the organization to successfully and feasibly sustain itself. You identify what those roles are, and then you create learning paths and learning opportunities for those individuals who have been highlighted as your star performers and those individuals that you would want to maintain and retain in the organization over the long run. So readying those individuals for those future promotional or transferable opportunities could mean external training, it could mean leadership development, it could mean supervisory training and development, it could mean short-term assignments in the organization that give those individuals the opportunity to flex those skills. Now, looking at external, so you know that you don't necessarily have the skill sets internally, and so if you've got to go outside, you have to be aware of some of the factors that will influence your ability to attract the right skills. And so economic conditions is at the top of that list. The rate of unemployment will certainly influence whether you will be in an employer's market or whether you'll be in an employee's market. And the employer's market is ideally where you want to be, where there are many applicants to pick, choose, and refuse from, rather than the opposite, where the choice is very limited, and sometimes you may need to make compromises in terms of getting the best possible skill set. Then you've got to also keep in mind the labor market conditions. So what's happening nationally, provincially, and locally as it relates to your organization and as it relates to the labor pool. Who's out there, where are they located, and how could it affect your ability to attract that right candidate at all or attract them in a timely fashion. And if you are locally positioned and the candidate, let's say the best candidate is outside of your province, then you have to think about the complications or at least the complexities in carrying on further conversation with that individual. So how might it affect your actual recruitment and attraction processes? And then you're looking at occupational market conditions. Now, those of you that have positions in your organizations where you're looking for major donor fundraisers, or those individuals that are responsible to build those one-to-one relationships for fundraising purposes, sometimes those skills are not as available as other times of the year. And so it's to understand what is the availability of those skills, number one, and then how accessible are they to you. So are the best ones currently employed and not looking for work, or are there ways in which to attract those skills perhaps from across the border? So in creating a workforce, having a recruitment strategy stands you in good stead in terms of understanding your demand, your supply, and now you have a sense of, okay, so I know where they're coming from, but I need to design how I will actually go about attracting them. And again, it goes back to aligning to your organizational goals and objectives. What kind of people does your organization need? What will the fit look like when the ideal candidate is working in your environment, which allows the organization to have a continuity in its levels of success. So just to check in with you at this point, we'd like to know what you think in terms of how you might use any one of these instances that we've already talked about. So that poll is coming up for you in just a minute.
So everybody, to weigh in on that, if you just want to type in your answers into your chat question box, and we'll highlight a few of those as they come up. Well, Veronica, I'm not seeing any questions come up so far, so perhaps we are good to go. Oh, just seeing somebody just said looking at labor markets will have an effect on sourcing.
Yeah.
It's very true. And we have another person. I plan to develop an inventory of qualifications and strengths of current staff members.
Excellent.
Definitely. And one more, I would like to start to highlight the things that we offer to our employees.
In terms of the value proposition. Sounds good. All right, so we're going to move on to the legal environment. And I know some of the legal documents that are out there can be daunting, and they can be a little intimidating. But I'm going to try and break it down for you in terms that hopefully you can understand, but drawing your attention to the pieces of legislation that you truly have to pay some attention to. So the legal environment has sort of three sets of governing realities out there. We've got our constitutional laws that take care of our Charter of Rights, which basically says I have the right to think the way I want to think, and I have the right to assemble in a peaceful way if that's what I need to do, if I believe my rights are being infringed. There is common law, which speaks to the actual written law, the law that gets exercised when an individual goes through the court and judicial process to try and wrong a right that they believe has been done to them. And then you have contract law, which is the written document that guides the relationship between the organization and the employee. Sometimes that contract is the actual employment contract, so the written document that lays out what the terms and conditions of employment are, how much the individual will get paid, what their start date is, etc. And then you have a collective agreement that could be guiding the way the organization is expected to manage its employees. At the federal level, there are approximately 10% of the employees out there that are governed by the Canada Labour Code. And those typically will be organizations that are financial institutions, they're in telecommunications, and they're in transportation. The rest of us, the other 90%, are for the most part governed by provincial laws. And of course, each province and or territory has their own legislation. And if you happen to be a national organization, you have the added complexity of understanding and working with every one of those different provincial or territorial pieces of legislation. And there's nuances, slight nuances from one province to another. And if we have any individuals from Quebec, we will always know that things are very different to a lot of the extent in Quebec than they are to the rest of the country. So if you do have employees in Quebec, you have to pay very particular attention to those details there. Now, human rights is at the top of the list in terms of legislation that you have to be aware of. And as it relates to the job and creating the job, you have to create the job in a way that is non-discriminatory. And discrimination can happen on a number of different grounds, so race, age, gender, disability, etc. And it can be identified as intentional discrimination or unintentional discrimination. And I'll give you a couple examples. So if you intentionally discriminate against an individual, or if you create a job that is intentionally discriminating, you are essentially saying that there are very specific groups or individuals that can or cannot do the job. So if you create a warehouse manager job and skew it so that only a male individual could actually do the job, perform the job, then the job is considered to be discriminatory in the way that it's designed. On the other side, on the unintentional side of things, sometimes it is within the practice of an organization's policies or their approach, and it's unintentional in that it's embedded in those policies and practices. And so it could simply have you vetting or at least putting in some of the elements of a job that would skew you to vet for individuals who had or showed a particular gender, perhaps, or age. So, for instance, with social media essentially being attractive to the younger generation, if you create a job that specifically is skewed to Gen Y in terms of the expectation of savviness to use technology, you could be eliminating unintentionally boomers and individuals beyond the boomer generation from applying to that job. And that's when it's unintentional. It's the language that's used, and it's perhaps even the way in which the work is designed. So two things to keep in mind in terms of what discrimination can look like. Bona fide occupational requirements, or BFOR, those are requirements that actually allow you to discriminate based on ensuring the job is able to be safely performed when an individual is doing the job. So I'm going to go outside of the nonprofit sector just for this example, But if you think about a pilot, an airplane pilot, there is a bona fide occupational requirement that a pilot has 20/20 vision. It seems obvious that you want that person to have the best level of vision so that the plane can, the individuals on the plane can safely arrive at their destination. That is considered a suitable bona fide occupational requirement. Let's go back to the example of a warehouse manager job. If you have a requirement to lift over 50 pounds, so boxes and or products that need to be carried, lifted, moved from one end of the warehouse to another, it wouldn't be enough to say that the individual has to be able to lift it. Why? Because there is machinery that could aid the individual in lifting a box from one part of the warehouse to another. So the weight restriction would be an unqualified bona fide occupational requirement, simply because there are ways in which to assist that lift to happen. Now, reasonable accommodation, particularly as it relates to the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act, that is, now out there in Ontario. Ontario is working towards being a completely accessible province by, I believe, 2020. And so what this is, how this influences the job is if the individual or if the job requires certain accommodations for it to be safely and productively performed, the organization has to think about how it might be able to make those accommodations on the job. So for instance, if you have an individual who will be working in a seated position for the most part, however, the job attracts an individual who can't sit for the majority of those hours, as an organization, you'll need to consider, well, how could we accommodate if the right individual had some sort of disability that that didn't allow them to sit for 8 or 10 hours a day for an individual who was not disabled. So thinking about how the job can be done in different ways up front on the ergonomic side of things will help you down the road so that you don't discriminate against perhaps a disabled individual who could do the job with just a few accommodations. Now, the other pieces of legislation, of course, employment standards, that's setting your minimum employee entitlements. Notice the word minimum. So it is telling you that there is a minimum wage, that there are minimum vacation entitlements, that there are minimum payments that need to be paid out should you release an individual. Not to say that you can't ever outdo what the government is saying, but it is very clear that it is the absolute minimum that you're working against. Now, on the other piece there, it sets the maximum hours of work permitted per day. And so if you want to have a job that works beyond those maximums, you actually have to get written permission from employment standards in order to lengthen a workday or lengthen a work week. The Canada Labour Code, again, going back to the federally jurisdicted employees, so those individuals that work for banks, transportation, or telecommunications, those labor codes apply to them, and there are some slight nuances, some variations as it relates to vacation, statutory holidays, minimum wage, those kinds of things. And then, of course, you have your Provincial and Territorial Labor Standards Act. And again, if you're a national organization, you do have to be cognizant of those differences from province to province and or territory. Employment equity and pay equity. We actually received an interesting question ahead of time from a participant, and the question referred to affirmative action. And I'm just going to address that here, in that affirmative action is very American. It is not what we do here in Canada. What we do here in Canada is employment equity. And employment equity works to address the 4 disadvantaged groups, given the pervasive employment patterns that historically have come about. And some of those patterns are that women, disabled persons, visible minorities, and Native Indians typically experience lower pay, occupational segregation, high unemployment, and low job status. And so employment equity and pay equity are in place to address those particular barriers to employment. I think one of the more obvious examples that I could give you, for those of you that take a taxi cab here in Toronto, you will typically be driven by an individual from outside of Canada, and if you begin to start to speak to this individual, you'll soon learn that they are either a PhD, or they have a chemical engineering degree, or some other high level of education, but here they are driving a cab because they're having difficulty breaking into the Canadian market. And so that's why employment and pay equity exist, to reduce those barriers. So in terms of understanding how this affects the design of your job, you'll want to be clear, again, that you're not creating jobs that segregate or discriminate from a woman, from a disabled person, from a visible minority, or from a Native Indian. Alrighty, and so we're just going to check in again with you, having heard some of those legal requirements. And I believe we do have a poll coming up this time.
Yes, here we go. So everyone, go ahead and take a look on your screen and vote. Veronica, while we're waiting for people to vote, we do have a couple of questions I'm wondering if you might want to answer now.
Sure.
The first being, how far do you have to go to accommodate someone?
Okay, yeah, always the question. There is a term that the government uses, particularly in this instance, and it's to the point of undue harm. Undue harm could essentially mean that a small organization who is funded by, let's say, Trillium, and you only have a certain level of funding to operate with. And if, for instance, your building requires a ramp to accommodate a disabled person, and the building that you're in is owned by the organization, not in a landlord situation. If that building is owned by you and the ramp has to be built, and the ramp cost exceeds what your operational funding is, that would be considered undue hardship. And so you would not be expected to fold your business in order to create a ramp. Hopefully that helps to answer the question. So it has to be a significant impact to the organization and the organization's well-being.
Excellent. And what about a situation where a staff member might need to bring their children to work because they haven't been able to make other arrangements for them?
That could be tricky, because it really does depend on the kind of business that your organization is in and the level of general insurance that your organization has. So for instance, if it's I'm going to say general office environment where you would typically have volunteers coming into the organization, if there is a safe spot in the organization, a room, perhaps, or if your office is fortunate enough to have a staff lounge, staff eating area, if your children can be accommodated in that space for a period of time without any harm coming to them, then, and if of course your organization is open to allowing that to happen, because of course this is a decision that the management has to be comfortable with, then there's no reason why that couldn't be accommodated. However, if it were in a situation where you had a warehouse and the staff member was a warehouse staff, and there is known to be heavy equipment or boxes or some sort of production line where harm could come to those who perhaps weren't in the right place at the right time, then the organization would likely not want to take that risk of having children underage in that space. So it really does depend on the environment that they would be brought into.
Excellent. Thanks, Veronica. So we've got the results of our poll here on the screen. Looks like we're about half and half. 45% say piece of cake, they're good to go.
Okay.
And yeah, and 52% are planning to revisit their notes after the webinar. So
excellent. Okay. So that's good. There's a good number of you out there with a good comfort level with what's expected. So we're going to move on to the fourth item on the agenda, which is actually defining and designing the job. So taking a look at job definition, job analysis, job description, and of course some performance standards. So what is a job? It's the work that a person does regularly in order to earn money, a duty, a task, or function, something that requires very great effort. So this is according to Merriam-Webster. So looking at what the individual at the end of the day needs to be able to do, it's all influenced by the organization's structure. So whether it's a hierarchical one or if it's flat, it's influenced by work teams. So does the individual expect that the job or the incumbent in the job will be working individually, or whether there are constructed teams in which the work needs to get done? Your business processes that you have in place. So do you have the technical systems that would support how the work is going to get done? Do you have the written documentation that will support how the work is going to get done? Behaviorally, what do you expect to see in terms of good performance? And this will feed right into your organization's values and the principles and the guidelines that direct how work is supposed to get done. Some of those job characteristics. So is it a job that is required to be done in a particular location? Is it a job that is required to have some level of reporting relationships with staff or with external suppliers? Is it a job that requires the individual to have a certain level of management responsibility and then a certain level of individual contribution? The ergonomics of the job. Is the person sitting? Are they standing? Are they working inside or outside? That will have influence on the job. And then, of course, the work arrangements, the hours of work. Is the individual able to have some level of flexibility about where they do the job? How do they do the job? What hours of work they're expected to keep? Those kinds of things. So you're taking a look at first defining the job. And so you define the job through a very systematic process that takes a look at the skills, the duties, and the knowledge required to perform those desired outcomes. And when you're taking a look at all of those elements, you have to understand where that information is coming from. And this little diagram gives you a sense of all of the different influencers of information when you are creating a job. So the people that do the job are absolutely the people that you need to be talking to. So the actual receptionist or the customer service representative is a person that you will want to speak to if you're trying to extract information about what that person does and how they do it when they're doing the job. The job analyst could be you as the manager, or it could be an external third-party supplier that you have coming in to help you get a better sense of what kinds of jobs you need in your organization. And of course, the supervisor has to be involved in the process of understanding what work should be done and how the work needs to get done. How do you collect that data? You can have one-on-one interviews with the individual, so asking very specific questions. You know, when you collect that information, what do you do with it? Who has access to it, and how do they have access to it, for example? You can give out questionnaires, and questionnaires can be pen and paper based, or lots of us like to use things like surveymonkey.com to facilitate that kind of data gathering. You can do it by observation. So if it is a job that has physical movement to it, then that's the right kind of job to observe and to be able to make notation around how the person actually conducts and performs the work. So for instance, if you have a driver, for those organizations that have drivers that go out and collect used clothing and home furnishings, how that driver interacts with the homeowner, how that driver actually handles the items that have been donated, all of those things can be observed. So an actionable job is a really good job to observe that way. And then records. There could be reports, there could be emails, there could be transactions. So if an individual is responsible to complete tax receipts, those kinds of things can be reviewed for an understanding of how the job is performed. All of that information, of course, you're looking to understand what tasks are being done, how they're being performed, what are some of the top-line responsibilities, what knowledge or education the individual is employing to do those tasks, what skills specifically, so do they need to be able to type a certain speed, or do they need to be able to speak in different languages, what previous experience would allow them to perform at a better level, the context in which the job is doing. All of those things are information that you're collecting in order to create the right job description, which clearly lays out what the tasks are, what those duties and responsibilities will be. The job specifications then come out of what educational requirements do they need. So what level of education or knowledge or experience, what are those physical demands? Are they sitting for the most day? Are they lifting? Are they carrying, moving? All of those things. And perhaps what other attributes or competencies do they need? Do they need to be able to communicate in both writing and verbally? Do they need to be able to exercise good time management, and so on? So you collect that information, and it helps you to get a thorough understanding of what that job is expected to perform. So again, you've got those individuals collecting. They're collecting through these mechanisms, the one-to-one interviews, the questionnaires, observations, records, and all of these elements. Now, moving on to performance standards, but if there's anything out there that you've learned in the last 3 to 5 minutes, feel free to tweet it out there. Now, looking more specifically at performance standards. these are going to identify the specific performance expectations. So I need the individual to be able to communicate in writing and verbally. Or I need the individual to be able to interact with individuals internally and externally to the organization. So it's those observable specific indicators that are going to allow you to determine whether the job is being performed at the standard that you need it to be performed at. And so you express those standards in terms of perhaps quantity, so $30 million, or the quality with less than 2% error, the timeliness. Of course, you know, if you've got a payroll clerk, you know that there are very stringent timelines in order for that payroll to be processed, and etc. So the job analysis creates a foundation for all of these other aspects that are going to come down the road, not only in the recruitment process, but in the retention process. So the performance, the training, and the compensation. So you set yourself up for broader organizational success when you've got the job analysis down in an accurate way. So at the end of the day, the job analysis is complete, and you are now able to formalize a document that speaks to the purpose of the job, who's going to be supervising that particular job, the responsibilities and or the outcomes. I'm a strong believer of outcome-based job descriptions rather than a list of tasks. And then, of course, the factors that will influence successful job performance. So again, those behaviors, those competencies, those requirements, those attributes. Now, once you've created the job description, you now have the tool to help you create the key selection criteria. And so you're going to be taking a look at things like education and other formal credentials. So if you're looking for a fundraiser, you may need them to have a certain fundraising certificate. Or if you're looking for a educational program designer, you will want them to perhaps have had a master's of education. You're looking, again, at very specific skills. So if written elements are required, or broader communication skills, time management, people management, using very specific software, those things come into determining whether you will or won't consider a candidate. And then, of course, the standards of performance, you're looking at some behaviors. So are they able to demonstrate how they do their job in a way that we can be proud of, in a way that is in line with our values? And do they have the personality attributes? So are they likable? Are they coachable? Are they individuals that will be able to interact with and collaborate with the team that you already have in place? And so with all that you've heard and seen today, your next steps are to consider the learning that you can begin to incorporate into your organization in terms of creating a job. Looking at those legal realities that you may need to enhance your own skill sets on. And then take what you've learned from today and refine the process to suit your organization. Some of you have said, you know what, I know most of the legal stuff. It's perhaps the job analysis piece that I need to work on. Or perhaps I've done the job analysis but didn't really think about all of those legal aspects. So it really is a matter of taking what you've heard today and creating your own job design plan so that it works for your organization. So at this point, I will offer the floor up for some questions.
That's great, Veronica. Thank you so much. We do have quite a few questions, so I'm going to try to get to what we can today. We had a Twitter question come through regarding the scenario you were discussing about a social media job description and how
Yes.
that might be considered discriminatory. Could you expand a little on that, or talk about how you could post a position like that without it being
Hmm.
labeled as discriminatory?
So often uh, we think that social media is only performed by young individuals. So rather than actually articulating in the posting, seeking young, savvy, entrepreneurial individual to create our social media, why not simply remove the word young and say looking for experienced, savvy, technically inclined individual?
Perfect. So it's less about the actual job of doing the social media and more about wanting to make sure that you're not explicitly excluding people in that job
Alienating.
description.
Exactly, exactly.
Excellent. And is sexual orientation protected under the Human Rights Code?
Absolutely.
Yes. And we have an interesting scenario here. Somebody writes, our college campus has 2 counselors. We specifically hire 1 male and 1 female in order to accommodate our student demographics. Would this be considered a problem?
In that instance, if you were able to demonstrate that the clientele requires that there be an association with an individual who they believe they can better or more easily approach, you might be in a position to demonstrate it as a bona fide occupational requirement. However, you run the risk of an individual saying, well, and I'll use sexual orientation as an example, is I don't feel that that individual is open to my personal choices. And so what happens is you set the organization up to be in a place of risk. It's always safer to look at the skill sets rather than the gender of an individual in order to be able to determine whether they have the right skill sets to do the job, regardless of their gender, their race, their sexual orientation, and all of those other aspects that can get you into trouble. But you would have to have a strong argument if it was ever questioned. If an individual went through the process and felt that they didn't get the job because they were male or female, the organization would be in a position to explain away that particular requirement.
Okay. And what about the legal limitations on requesting an applicant to undergo a psychological evaluation?
Um, if it can be demonstrated that the individual needs to have a certain level of mental balance or mental acuity to perform the job, then it can be a part of the process as long as it's being objectively administered to every single applicant, that you're not delineating anyone from another because you think this one may not be as balanced. It has to be a clear part of the process, and that it's transparently shared with the individuals as part of the introduction to the process, that they could be expected to participate in such an evaluation. On that note, what I will say is in Canada, you cannot test for substance abuse as part of the hiring process. You can do it after the hiring process, but you cannot do it as part of the process.
Okay, that's interesting. And if an employee works over the max hours, as you had mentioned, that they needed to get written permission, where does this request generally go to? Who would you write to for
Ministry
that?
of Labor. Ministry of
Okay,
Labor.
excellent. And we have one question about the job analysis section of your presentation. When employees seem to be confused about everyone's role and responsibility within the department, would you recommend performing a job analysis to help those employees understand their own role better and that of others?
Absolutely. It brings clarity, but what it also might uncover is that perhaps there are some redundancies, or that there is some level, or there's a gap. Sorry. So you will either see redundancies or a gap through the job analysis process.
Great. And a question about maternity leave. What are the legal obligations for an organization that has someone returning from maternity leave, but there's no funds for the position that she held a year ago?
If there are no funds, and if there's no one currently in the role that she left or he left, then you need to take a look at what comparable roles there might be in the organization that this person might be able to step into. If there are no comparable roles that the individual could step into, then you're looking at severance. You're looking at termination and or severance, depending on the size of your organization.
Great, okay. And just one final question before we wrap up. If this person says they have a staff member whose English is acceptable, however, the written English is not as good, they've asked this employee to take a course to improve her skills. Who's responsible for payment of a course like that?
Well, the organization would be expected to support the individual. Support could mean a course. Support could mean pairing that individual up with someone in the organization who has impeccable English skills and would be able to transfer some of that knowledge. Support could be in the form of lining that individual up with organizations, agencies that are experts in literacy development. So there's a number of different ways in which that kind of support could be provided. It doesn't necessarily have to cost. It just means getting creative about finding the right support.
Excellent. Sounds like there's a few options there for them. Good. Well, I think we're going to leave it at that. We're just a few minutes over our time here. So I'd like to thank you very much, Veronica. It was a wonderful presentation, and I'm sure that everyone learned a lot today, and we'll probably need to revisit the recording when we send it out to get some of those spots that they might have missed. So we will be sending that out in the next few days along with some other material to you all. And again, thank you very much for joining us today. If you have any questions about the presentation, about Charity Village, etc., please do contact us at any time. We're always happy to chat. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.